Lightning slashed across the sky like a jagged scar as thunder rattled the ornate windows of the Kensington estate. The funeral had ended hours before, but Ebony still stood in the grand foyer, her heart pounding, grief swirling with suspicion. Something about her father's will felt wrong. Her half-brother's sneer and the family lawyer's forced sympathy haunted the edges of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that a damning secret hid within the towering walls around her. In that moment, Ebony realized she wasn't just battling her heartbreak, she was fighting for the truth. And little did she know, the cost of uncovering that truth would be greater than she ever imagined. Ebony felt the evening's cold seep through her thick coat as she exited the estate. Snowflakes began to swirl under the porch light, dusting the steps that led down to the circular driveway. The old house loomed behind her walls, brimming with generations of stories, pride, scandal, and secrets. The reading of her father's will had taken place only hours before, yet her mind was already spinning with questions. It all happened so quickly. The family lawyer, Richard Stone, had read a version of the will that surprised everyone. According to him, Ebony's inheritance was minimal, almost laughable, while her half-brother Trevor emerged as the primary heir. She knew her father, James Kensington, too well to believe he'd slight her so cruelly. There was no doubt they had their misunderstandings, especially regarding Ebony's decision to move out at 18 and pursue a career in journalism. But he had never been one to discriminate between Ebony and her half-siblings. Even when Ebony's mother passed away, James tried to maintain a loving environment. In Ebony's heart, she felt certain her father would have split the inheritance fairly. The will read by Richard Stone, though painted a different picture. As the cold nipped at her cheeks, Ebony remembered the final days at her father's bedside. His rasping voice, full of regret for past mistakes, had also carried hope. He talked about setting things right, ensuring Ebony would never feel like an outsider in her own family again. She clung to that memory like a lifeline. Now it was time to figure out where it had all gone wrong and whether Richard Stone was at the heart of it. Richard Stone was no stranger to the Kensington family. He had served as their attorney for nearly 2 decades. He and James had attended Harvard Law School in the same year. Though they weren't the closest of friends during those days, when James suddenly needed an estate lawyer after Ebony's mother died, Richard conveniently stepped in. Through birthdays, Christmas gatherings, and tense business negotiations, Richard had become a fixture in their lives. To Ebony, Richard seemed too smooth, too practiced to be entirely trustworthy. But Ebony's father believed in him enough to let him handle legal affairs for the entire family, and so Ebony, out of respect for her father's trust, hadn't questioned Richard's presence. Yet something in that day's reading of the will set alarm bells off in her mind. The words on the pages felt unnatural, as if they'd been carefully crafted to push Ebony out, placing Trevor on a pedestal as the rightful heir. As she got into her car, Ebony contemplated her next move. The winter wind howled. She glanced at the windows of the estate where silhouettes moved behind the curtains. Probably Trevor and his wife, celebrating his sudden windfall. Ebony's hands clenched the steering wheel. She couldn't simply let this go. She wasn't after the money. She wasn't even sure how much there was. It was the principle. Her father had loved her, and she refused to let his last wishes be twisted into something else. She needed to dig deeper, and perhaps find a lawyer she could trust. Over the next few days, Ebony wrestled with her suspicions. She pored over old photographs, diaries, and any letters from her father that might hold clues to his estate plans. Sleep became scarce, overshadowed by the gnawing doubt that Richard had lied, flat out manipulated the will in a way that favored Trevor. Despite Ebony's best efforts, she found nothing conclusive. No smoking gun of changed signatures or missing pages. She considered confronting Trevor directly, but her half-brother had always looked down on her, as the white child of James's second marriage. Trevor had grown up with all the privileges Ebony hadn't. It wasn't a matter of skin color alone, but the subtle difference in how relatives treated Ebony's mother, a black woman, in a predominantly white, upper-crust social circle. Ebony had felt the sting of those judgments from an early age, and Trevor, always eager to please the older generation, had learned to mimic their attitudes. Still, Ebony wasn't about to let any bias keep her from the truth. She remembered the final conversation with her father. "You are the strongest of them all," he said, his hand trembling around hers. "Keep fighting, Ebony. I love you. Don't let them ever tell you otherwise." The sincerity in his eyes that day had convinced Ebony she was never as alone as she felt. Those were the words of a father who wanted her to be okay, even if he wasn't around. If only she had a shred of proof that the official will was forged or tampered with, she could launch a proper investigation. Determined to get professional help, Ebony made a quiet decision. She would seek out a second opinion from another attorney, but not just any attorney. Through an old friend at the local news station, Ebony managed to contact a reputable law firm, Morgan & Morgan. Though they often dealt with personal injury and other high-profile cases, Ebony's friend insisted they had a department that could assist with contested wills. Before scheduling the appointment, Ebony locked herself in the spare bedroom of her modest apartment and laid out every document she possessed on the bed. Her father's letters, photos of them together from family vacations, that short note from 2 years prior when he had mentioned updating his estate plan after Ebony's half-sister Charlotte passed away. If any of this could be cross-referenced against the official, she might detect inconsistencies. Ebony felt an unfamiliar surge of determination course through her veins. She wouldn't back down, no matter the cost. When she finally called Morgan & Morgan, Ebony explained her situation, briefly but carefully. The receptionist's voice was sympathetic, taking notes and promising to connect her with an estate lawyer within the firm who specialized in contested wills. They set an appointment for the following week. As Ebony hung up the phone, she felt relief. Perhaps it was possible to right this wrong. In the days leading up to her meeting with Morgan & Morgan, Ebony did her best to keep her suspicions under wraps. She knew that if Trevor or Richard Stone caught wind of her plans, they might take steps to hide whatever evidence existed, or even intimidate potential witnesses. Meanwhile, Ebony couldn't avoid the hostility from Trevor. He sent her a curt text message. "Stay out of matters that don't concern you," as if to rub salt into the wound. She had no intention of replying. There was a deep-seated tension between them that had only grown more bitter since the funeral. Unbeknownst to Trevor, Ebony took a single trip back to the Kensington estate on a weekday, timing her visit while he was likely out finalizing real estate deals or overshadowing other business ventures. The grand house felt hollow without her father's presence. She slipped in through the back entrance, using the house key her father had never asked her to return. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the usual bustle of staff and family. Ebony's heart pounded as she navigated the familiar hallways. She had one place in mind, her father's private study. She remembered how meticulously James locked away important documents in a heavy oak desk. Now, if only he'd left something behind, an earlier draft of the will, or a note about his final wishes. She found the desk untouched, locked as always. With trembling hands, Ebony tried each of the spare keys on her father's old keyring. After several attempts, she heard a faint click. Inside the desk drawer, Ebony discovered an array of documents, contracts, receipts, and sealed letters. Her eyes scanned each one, heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, she thought she'd struck gold when she uncovered a folder labeled Estate Plans. Carefully, Ebony opened it, only to find outdated documents from years ago, referencing a time before certain changes in the family had even occurred. Her father must have updated his will multiple times over the years, given the changing landscape of his finances and relationships. Still, Ebony wasn't ready to give up. She found a small locked box nestled at the back of the drawer. Curiosity tugged at her as she tried the keys again, but none fit. Feeling desperate, she remembered a childhood trick her father sometimes hid tiny items in the spines of old books. Rummaging through the nearby shelves, Ebony eventually stumbled on a small key taped to the back cover of a tattered legal tome. With a deep breath, she tried the key on the box. Another click. What she found inside wasn't a will, but something else. A set of letters addressed to Ebony, never mailed. Her father's bold handwriting scrawled her name on each envelope. Confusion and heartache warred within her as she carefully unfolded the first letter. In it, James apologized for the tensions he had allowed to fester, especially how Ebony felt alienated within her own family due to subtle prejudice. He also mentioned a revised estate plan that would ensure Ebony was taken care of, but he never specified the amount, the distribution, or the date. The second letter spoke of his conversation with Richard about finalizing changes. While not the hard evidence she needed, the letters confirmed Ebony's suspicions. Her father intended for her to receive a significant portion, perhaps even an equal share of his estate. Why else would he apologize for the rifts and promise she'd be recognized? Yet the official will read by Richard Stone told a very different story. Ebony tucked the letters into her bag, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She had enough to suggest foul play, but she needed a real legal strategy to prove it. On Monday morning, Ebony sat in the glass-walled office of Morgan & Morgan's estate attorney, a calm-faced woman named Alicia Rodriguez. Alicia's demeanor was reassuring. She offered a warm handshake and listened intently as Ebony recounted her story. Occasionally, Alicia asked clarifying questions, but mostly she took notes. Ebony handed over the letters from her father, explaining how the tone and content sharply contrasted with the will Richard Stone had revealed. Alicia read them carefully, nodding. "These letters suggest your father intended to provide for you more substantially than this new will states," Alicia said. "Of course, letters alone aren't enough to prove the will was tampered with, but it's a strong starting point. The next step is to file a formal challenge. That means we'll need the official version of the will, the death certificate, and any prior versions we can get our hands on." Her heartbeat quickened at the word challenge. Ebony realized that once she stepped onto this path, there would be no going back. She'd be taking on not just Richard Stone, but possibly Trevor, and anyone else who benefited from the contested will. Still, Ebony nodded. "I'm ready," she said. "I have to do this. My father didn't raise me to walk away from injustice." Alicia gave her a supportive smile. "I'll gather the necessary documents. We'll likely request the official will from the probate court and cross-check signatures and notarizations. In the meantime, keep a low profile. If what you suspect is true, Richard Stone may not react kindly to your challenge." Ebony exhaled, steeling herself. A storm was brewing, but she refused to let fear deter her. Ebony walked out of Morgan & Morgan with renewed focus. The firm's glass doors reflected her image, a determined woman, eyes set on unraveling a web of deceit. Yet a ripple of anxiety coursed through her at the thought of what might happen if Richard Stone realized she was building a case against him. She knew he was influential, and that Trevor had more connections than she could ever hope to muster. Still, Ebony possessed something they both underestimated, her father's genuine affection, which was spelled out in those hidden letters. She also had her journalistic instincts. After all, Ebony worked in investigative journalism for a local newspaper, the Elkwood Gazette, for almost 3 years. She had honed her ability to dig deep into hidden records, interview reluctant sources, and follow paper trails. The next few days would be crucial. She cancelled her usual assignments and poured her energy into the will. She scoured the local probate records, searching for any mention of her father's estate. She discovered to her surprise that the official will had been registered just a few days before James Kensington fell gravely ill. That was suspicious timing, but not impossible. Still, Ebony remembered that her father's health took a drastic turn 6 months before his death, which made the last-minute timing of the will even more questionable. The deeper she dug, the more she felt a second wave of tension rise. If Richard had orchestrated this, he was cunning enough to cover his tracks. Ebony needed something more concrete than a suspicious timeline. That evening, Ebony found herself in her small living room, surrounded by stacks of papers and digital devices. The hum of her laptop accompanied her as she compiled every shred of data: property records, trust accounts, statements of old family businesses. Her father owned stakes in a handful of local ventures, including the Riverside Inn, a quaint but profitable bed and breakfast. She noticed something odd. According to the official probate filings, Ebony's name was nowhere mentioned in these property transfers or ownership shares. Normally, even if a child was left out of the direct inheritance, the legal documents would note an acknowledgement of that child's existence. But Ebony was invisible in these records. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. It was a text from Alicia. "Please come by tomorrow morning. I have new information." Ebony's stomach knotted. She wondered if Alicia had discovered a glaring inconsistency, or if something else had come up. She tried to quell her nerves, telling herself this was good news, that maybe Alicia had found the proof they needed to confront Richard Stone. Ebony carefully filed away her research, locked her front door, and collapsed onto her bed. Yet sleep remained elusive, as visions of her father's final days haunted her. She remembered the beep of hospital monitors, the beep that echoed like a countdown to heartbreak. In those memories, her father's voice merged with the rustle of legal papers, a swirl of guilt, love, and urgency. "I'm so proud of you, Ebony," she heard him whisper in her mind. She vowed silently to do justice by him, no matter what came next. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of Alicia's office the next morning, casting lines of brightness across the polished wood desk. Alicia looked up from her computer when Ebony entered, offering a gentle smile. "I've got some early findings," she said, gesturing for Ebony to sit. "We've obtained the official copy of the will from the probate court, along with the witness statements and notarization logs. One red flag stands out. The notary signature belongs to an individual named Anthony Green, who, according to the public record, was out of the country on the day the will was supposedly notarized." Ebony's jaw dropped. "That means the notarization could be fake?" she asked. "Exactly." Alicia responded, her gaze steady. "We need to follow up. But if it's proven that the notarization is fraudulent, then the will itself can be contested as invalid. We can attempt to revert to the prior, valid will, assuming we can locate it. The problem is, we don't have a copy of that prior will yet. We only have your father's letters suggesting what it might have contained." Ebony's heart fluttered. This was the kind of tangible evidence she'd been hoping for. "Do you think Richard Stone knew about the fake notarization?" she asked softly. Alicia pursed her lips. A lawyer of Richard's caliber would be expected to verify that the notarization is legitimate, best-case scenario. He was sloppy, worst-case scenario. Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Richard Stone might be directly implicated in forging the entire document. Before leaving the building, Ebony thanked Alicia and scheduled another meeting for the following week. The moment she stepped into the elevator, Ebony's phone buzzed. It was Trevor. She sighed, hesitating, but answered. "What do you want?" Ebony said curtly, "I'd like to talk face to face." Trevor replied, voice clipped. "Things have gotten complicated, and I'd rather not do this over the phone." She almost refused, but her journalist's curiosity got the better of her. "Fine. We're Dad's study at the estate tonight, 8 o'clock, Trevor said, and hung up without waiting for her reply. Ebony stood in the elevator, phone in hand, mind churning. Why would Trevor want to meet in the study? Did he suspect she'd been snooping around? Or was he concerned about something else, like the notarization scandal about to unfold? Despite her misgivings, Ebony felt compelled to go. She needed answers, even if it meant stepping back into the lion's den. That night, Ebony arrived at the Kensington estate a few minutes before 8. The wind had picked up again, rattling the leafless branches in the expansive yard. She parked at the edge of the driveway, wanting a clear path to leave if things got heated. Trevor stood at the front door, looking impatient. His tall frame and sharp features reminded Ebony of their father, though the familial warmth was nowhere to be seen. He ushered her inside, leading her down the hall to the study. The space smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a comforting scent that stirred Ebony's memories. "How are you, Ebony?" Trevor asked, though his tone was tense. "Cut the act," Trevor Ebony said, folding her arms. "You didn't bring me here to check on my well-being. What's going on?" Trevor paced near the fireplace, his eyes downcast. Finally he spoke. "Look, I know you're trying to challenge the will." "And how do you know that?" Ebony asked. "Richard told me," Trevor answered. "He's furious. He says he has everything under control and that your claim won't go anywhere. But—" Trevor paused, leaning against the mantel. "But there's something about all this that's bothering me. Dad and I didn't always see eye to eye, but he was never cruel. Leaving you. Almost nothing doesn't feel right." Even Mum thought it was strange, Ebony swallowed, not entirely convinced. "So you're suddenly on my side." Trevor's eyes flashed with frustration. "I'm not on your side." "Ebony, I'm on my own side. For a while, I just accepted what Richard said, that Dad changed his will at the last minute, that everything was above board. But I've started to question the timeline. Richard had me sign some documents months before Dad even got sick. Now I'm wondering if we've all been played." Ebony tried to read Trevor's face. He looked genuinely unsettled, far from the smug half-brother who had gloated about the inheritance. She took a cautious step closer. "So what do you want from me?" she asked, voice steady. He glanced at her, a glimmer of vulnerability in his eyes. "If Richard forged the will, I want no part in that. But if I blow the whistle on him, I stand to lose everything. If the will is deemed invalid, we might have to revert to the old one, and I have no idea what that means for me." Financially, Ebony almost scoffed at how obviously money-oriented Trevor remained, but a part of her sympathized. They both had grown up under the shadow of their father's legacy, constantly navigating shifting family dynamics. "We can figure something out," she said. "But we have to do the right thing. We owe that much to Dad, Trevor." Nodded reluctantly. "I know, I just need to be sure. So let's make a deal. If you find hard proof that Richard acted illegally, I'll back you up. If you can't, then you drop this, and we move on. Ebony's gaze hardened. It's not a game. Trevor, if there's fraud, we're dealing with serious crimes. But fine, we'll do it your way. I already have a lawyer working on this, and I've found some red flags. Once I have concrete proof, I'll show you. Trevor exhaled, relief and anxiety mingling on his face. All right, it's a deal. And Ebony, be careful. Richard isn't the type of person to take betrayal lightly. She smirked, recalling the countless nights she spent poring over shady dealings in her journalism work. Don't worry about me, she said quietly. I can handle it. Leaving the estate. Ebony felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. She never expected Trevor to show even a hint of doubt or moral dilemma. For years he seemed to enjoy the unspoken favoritism bestowed upon him. Yet there he was, openly questioning Richard Stone's authenticity. Ebony found it both unsettling and strangely encouraging. As she headed to her car, she noticed movement behind the curtains of an upstairs window. Someone watching. A chill ran through her. She slipped into her car and drove away, checking her rear-view mirror. The driveway remained empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes followed her through the darkness. By the time she reached her apartment, Ebony's nerves were on edge. She checked her phone, a missed call from Alicia, and a voicemail. The message was brief but urgent. Ebony, it's Alicia. We've run into a snag. Call me back as soon as you can. Ebony's stomach twisted. She dialed Alicia immediately, her hands shaking. Alicia picked up on the first ring. Ebony, good you called. I went to follow up on the notary who supposedly signed off on your father's will. Turns out Anthony Green is real, but he claims he never signed anything for James Kensington, and he certainly wasn't in town. He's willing to provide a statement. The problem is, his initial contact with me was cut short. I suspect he's being intimidated, or might be threatened. We need to protect him if we want his testimony. Ebony's pulse raced. Threats. Had Richard Stone stooped to intimidation already? She drew in a breath. All right, she said. Let's make sure Mr. Green knows. We'll do everything we can to keep him safe. I'll see if I can meet with him in person. Alicia arranged a clandestine meeting with Anthony Green a couple of nights later. Ebony insisted on tagging along her journalist instincts, refused to let her sit by idle, while a critical witness wavered. They agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a dimly lit place that boasted anonymity. Ebony arrived early, sipping tea, at a corner table, nerves buzzing. Alicia walked in soon after, joined by a man in his late 40s with a cautious expression. Anthony Green wore glasses that slipped down his nose, and his demeanor was that of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. They exchanged introductions quietly, and Alicia quickly laid out the situation. Anthony confirmed that the signature on the will's notary section resembled his handwriting, but the date and location were impossible. He was on a week-long trip in Europe during that time. Someone must have lifted an old notary stamp of mine, he whispered, eyes darting around the cafe. I left it in my office by mistake once years ago, but I never used it for James Kensington. Ebony leaned forward. So you can testify that the notarization is fraudulent. Anthony hesitated, fiddling with his coffee cup. I can, but I'm afraid I've gotten calls. Strangers telling me to stay out of it. One time someone even rattled my door at night. Alicia placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We can petition for witness protection, or at least a restraining order if we can identify who's harassing you. But your testimony is key, Mr. Green. Without it, the courts might just assume Ebony's allegations are baseless. Anthony nodded slowly. I'll testify I need to do the right thing, but I hope you're prepared for a fight. Whoever's behind this, they're resourceful." Ebony felt a jolt of gratitude and apprehension. She exchanged a look with Alicia, a silent acknowledgement that they had just taken another step down a dangerous path. Still, truth was truth, and Ebony wouldn't back down, with Anthony Green's willingness to testify. Alicia stepped up the legal process. She filed a formal challenge in probate court, citing possible fraud and attaching Green's statement. Ebony's role became more public, prompting calls and messages from family members and acquaintances who had suddenly caught wind of the scandal. Some relatives expressed shock, siding with Ebony, convinced James would never cut her out of the will. Others argued Ebony was stirring trouble. Social media posts popped up with snarky comments about the disgruntled daughter trying to get more money. Ebony tried to ignore the noise, focusing on the objective, unmasking the truth and honoring her father's real wishes. To Ebony's surprise, Trevor made good on his word. He didn't publicly renounce the will, but he stopped defending it. He refused to give interviews to local reporters and parted ways with Richard Stone's law firm in hush-hush circumstances. Ebony noticed he had grown reclusive, rarely showing up at the estate anymore. She wondered if the weight of possible fraud was eating him from the inside. Meanwhile, Ebony also received unexpected support from Aunt Martha, her father's elderly sister. Though Aunt Martha had never been overly warm, she had always maintained a sort of neutral acceptance of Ebony. She reached out with a phone call one evening, voice trembling with concern. "I just had to tell you," Ebony, Aunt Martha said. "I believe you. Your father and I had our differences, but he cared deeply for you. He told me so himself. Don't let anyone rewrite his love for you. Keep fighting." Tears stung Ebony's eyes as she thanked her aunt. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Ebony, who so often felt alone. News of the will contest gained traction in the local media, and Ebony's journalist instincts urged her to control the narrative. She penned a measured op-ed piece for the New York Times through a personal contact who freelanced there, detailing the legal complexities of challenging a fraudulent will without divulging private family affairs. She explained the importance of rightful inheritance, legal ethics, and the moral duty to uphold a loved one's genuine intentions. While she didn't name Richard Stone in the piece on advice from Alicia, she highlighted how unscrupulous lawyers could exploit vulnerabilities in estate planning. The article garnered attention and sparked conversation nationwide. Some commended Ebony for her courage, while others remained skeptical, cautioning that disputes often arise from greed. Ebony braced herself for backlash, but the overall response was more positive than she anticipated. She started receiving messages from individuals who had been in similar predicaments, some offering tips on how to navigate the legal labyrinth, others simply sharing their stories of heartbreak. Amid all of this, Ebony maintained her composure, determined to see things through Richard Stone, however, was conspicuously silent. No press releases, no public statements. But Ebony felt certain he was strategizing behind the scenes. If he had faked a notarization, he might have other evidence tucked away, or additional layers of deceit. Alicia warned Ebony to be extra cautious, especially after hours. Still, Ebony's conviction only hardened. She would shine a light on the truth, no matter how deep the shadows around her family name stretched. The probate court scheduled an initial hearing to assess whether Ebony's challenge had merit. If the court found enough evidence of potential fraud, they would proceed with a more formal trial. Ebony felt her throat tighten as she and Alicia prepared for the hearing. Trevor was set to appear along with Richard Stone, who still nominally represented the estate. On the day of the hearing, Ebony approached the courthouse with Alicia by her side. A small gathering of reporters and curious onlookers hovered by the main entrance. Ebony saw camera flashes and heard murmurs as she passed. She took a deep breath and entered the building prepared for battle. Inside the courtroom, the judge was a stern-faced woman named Judge Pierce. Her sharp gaze surveyed the participants, and Ebony could almost feel the seriousness in the air. Alicia presented their argument, succinctly evidence of a potentially fraudulent notarization, irregularities in the timeline, and Ebony's father's letters suggesting different intentions. Richard Stone remained calm despite the tension. He argued that Ebony provided no concrete proof linking him to fraud, and that last-minute will changes were not unheard of in estate law. Then Anthony Green took the stand. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice held a quiet resolve. Under oath, he reiterated that the notary signature on James Kensington's will could not have come from him on the stated date. He backed it up with airline tickets, passport stamps, and even hotel receipts showing he was abroad. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Pierce frowned at Richard Stone. "This is significant testimony. Mr. Stone, do you have evidence to the contrary?" Stone cleared his throat, managing a tight smile. "We need time to investigate Mr. Green's claims. There may be a misunderstanding or a clerical oversight." The judge nodded. "Very well, we will schedule a follow-up hearing. In the meantime, the court has reason to believe the authenticity of the will is in question." Ebony exhaled relief, mingling with anxiety. The fight was far from over, but she had cleared the first hurdle. Richard Stone shot her a glare across the courtroom, a silent warning that the war had just begun. Outside the courthouse, Ebony faced a barrage of questions from reporters. She gave a composed statement, reaffirming her goal. "I'm simply honoring my father's true wishes. I'm not motivated by money, but by respect for his legacy." Alicia guided her away before the press could badger her further. As Ebony headed to her car, she spotted Trevor in the distance, talking to someone who looked like an associate of Richard's. Their conversation appeared tense. Trevor glanced in her direction, gave a curt nod, and turned away. Ebony couldn't help but wonder if Trevor was caught between his conscience and his fear of losing the inheritance. That evening, Ebony returned to her apartment, exhausted. She checked her mailbox, finding an unmarked envelope. Inside heart pounding, she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Ebony leaving the estate late at night, presumably from her secret visit to her father's study. Beneath the photo was a typewritten note. "Stop now, or pay the price." Her blood ran cold. She dashed inside, locking the door behind her, every nerve on edge. She called Alicia, voice trembling as she explained the threat. Alicia urged her to report it to the police, which Ebony did. That night, Ebony realized the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. She was plunging headlong into a world where intimidation, blackmail, and possibly worse were on the table. But the threat only fueled her determination. If Richard Stone or one of his cronies thought she'd back down, they had another thing coming. In the weeks that followed, Ebony increased her security measures. She asked her landlord to install a better lock, made sure to vary her routes home, and stayed alert for any suspicious cars tailing her. Meanwhile, Alicia pressed forward with legal motions to depose Richard Stone under oath. The next step was to question Stone about the notary discrepancy, the last-minute changes to the will, and any prior drafts he might have kept. Stone's legal team tried to stall filing motions to delay. They argued that Alicia's requests were invasive and that attorney-client privilege should protect Stone's communications. Judge Pierce, however, allowed the deposition to proceed, albeit under strict parameters. The day before the deposition, Ebony felt a swirl of tension. She recalled how Stone used to smile genially at family gatherings, telling Ebony she had her father's eyes. Now she wondered how long that smile had been a mask for betrayal. On the morning of the deposition, Ebony sat beside Alicia in a conference room at the courthouse Stone, arrived with a small entourage of junior associates and a personal assistant. He wore an impeccable grey suit, his hair slicked back, exuding confidence. But when he locked eyes with Ebony, she detected a trace of unease. However well hidden, the court reporter swore him in, and Alicia began with straightforward questions. Stone answered them smoothly, providing a timeline of James Kensington's alleged instructions and the drafting process for the will. When Alicia introduced the notary issue, Stone maintained that all procedures were followed, and that if there was an error, it must have been administrative. Or the notary's mistake, Alicia pressed harder. "Mr. Stone, can you explain why these notary stamps appear on several documents dated when Mr. Green was out of the country?" Stone gave a dismissive shrug. "Perhaps he made an error in his records. Perhaps there is an identical name. I cannot say. It is not my job to keep track of the notary's whereabouts." Ebony seethed, biting her tongue to keep from shouting. The man was lying effortlessly, as if reading from a script, but Alicia had an ace up her sleeve. She produced a copy of an email from Stone's office to Green's referencing the will and requesting the notary seal on a very specific date. One that coincided with Green's travel. Stone's face tightened. For a moment, Ebony swore she saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. Stone's legal team immediately objected, calling the email inadmissible because it was allegedly obtained without proper consent. Alicia calmly explained that it came from a lawful subpoena of Stone's office correspondence, and the judge had cleared it. Stone's face reddened. He tried to recover, insisting the email was a standard template sent automatically by a paralegal. But the damage was done. For the first time, Ebony sensed a crack in Stone's armor of composure. The deposition dragged on for hours. Stone's answers became more evasive, and his lawyers frequently interjected with objections. Alicia meticulously documented every response, setting the stage for a future court showdown. By the time the session ended, Ebony felt a draining combination of triumph and exhaustion. As Stone gathered his papers, Ebony locked eyes with him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, voice laced with hurt. "My father trusted you." Stone didn't answer directly. He gave a tight smile and said, "Sometimes there are things you can't understand. Ebony, let it go. For your own good." And with that, he exited the room, leaving Ebony with a swirl of disgust and determination. Events escalated after the deposition. Judge Pierce ruled that there was enough evidence to warrant a full-blown trial, setting a date 2 months down the line. This meant Ebony would have to stand up in court face Stone and prove her allegations. Trevor was subpoenaed as well, given his role as the primary beneficiary and a potential witness. Meanwhile, Ebony's nights were plagued by anxiety and half-remembered dreams of her father. She took to journaling late at night, pouring out her fears and hopes onto paper. She wrote about how she missed her father's reassuring presence, how she wished he were here to confirm everything with a simple signature. She wrote about the guilt she felt in dredging up family skeletons, the resentment toward Trevor, and the complicated swirl of emotions from an upbringing where Ebony never truly felt she belonged. Amid the emotional turmoil, Ebony also searched for that elusive previous version of the will. She made calls to her father's former associates, rummaged through Aunt Martha's attic, and even scoured old safe deposit records. No one seemed to have a copy, though a few remembered hearing James talk about wanting to make sure Ebony was taken care of. It was all hearsay, with no official document to back it up. The press coverage gained momentum, especially after the deposition details leaked. High-profile lawyer accused of will fraud read one headline in the local paper, Family inheritance battle takes. Dark turn announced another. Ebony saw more camera crews lurking outside the courthouse, and her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with interview requests. She ignored most of them, focusing on the upcoming trial. The words from the threatening note still echoed in her mind, a reminder that somewhere behind the scenes, darker forces lurked. When Ebony finally managed a weekend to herself, she spent it organizing her father's letters, reading them over and over, searching for any clue she might have missed. Amid her father's apologies and reassurances, she noticed a passing reference to a trust agreement. The letter, dated roughly 2 years before his death, mentioned a plan to set up a trust specifically for Ebony, something that would guarantee her an income without the complexities of property management. The letter didn't detail how far along James was in creating this trust, but Ebony's mind whirled. If such a trust existed, or was in the process of being established, it might yield further documentation. She called Alicia and explained the discovery. Alicia listened carefully. "I'll look into it." Alicia replied, "We might need to subpoena additional financial institutions or trust management companies. If your father was working on this, there might be a paper trail." Ebony breathed a sigh of hope. Maybe this would be the breakthrough they needed. If she could prove her father was working on a separate trust for her, that in itself might debunk Richard's claim that James intentionally wrote her out of the will. Alicia's research turned up a lead. James had met with a representative from a firm called Bellevue Trust shortly before his final hospitalization. Bellevue Trust confirmed that James had made inquiries about setting up a trust for Ebony, but the paperwork was never finalized. They did, however, have some preliminary documents on file documents listing Ebony as the sole beneficiary. It was all incomplete, but enough to raise eyebrows about James's true intentions. The court subpoenaed Bellevue Trust's records, which revealed that James had paid a consultation fee and was in the process of transferring a portion of his assets. However, there was a sudden stop in communications around the time Richard Stone allegedly took over finalizing the estate. The Bellevue Trust representative noted that Mr. Stone assured us the matter would be handled through his office, but then all contact ceased. Ebony's heart pounded as she read the statement. It appeared Stone had deliberately intervened to halt the creation of that trust. Alicia prepared the new evidence for the upcoming trial. "This is compelling, Ebony," she told her. "It aligns with everything else your father wanted you to have a secure inheritance." And suddenly the process got derailed when Stone stepped in. Ebony nodded, bracing herself. She knew Stone wouldn't go down without a fight, but every new piece of information bolstered her resolve. She couldn't help thinking with gratitude about the hidden letters and the incomplete trust forms her father had tried. He had tried to set things right for her, even if he didn't live to see it through. 2 weeks before the trial, Ebony received an unexpected phone call from Trevor. "Can we meet?" he asked, voice strained. She hesitated, recalling their uneasy truce. "What's this about?" she replied. "I have some new information." He said something that might affect the trial. "Please, Ebony." "I'm serious this time," she agreed, suggesting a public location, a coffee shop in the center of town. Trevor arrived looking gaunt, his eyes shadowed by dark circles. He ordered a black coffee, hands trembling slightly as he tried to sip it. Ebony studied him, remembering the arrogant older brother who used to belittle her. This version seemed haunted. "I've got a confession," Trevor began, his voice low. "I've been in contact with Stone more than I let on. He's been pressuring me to testify that Dad intentionally cut you out. He offered me more money if I cooperated, threatened me with legal repercussions if I didn't." He even hinted at shady tactics, referencing my own finances and potential indiscretions he'd reveal if I didn't play along. Ebony's stomach turned. "Why are you telling me this now?" Trevor sighed, his gaze drifting to the swirl of traffic outside. "Because I can't live with it. Dad wouldn't want this. I know I've been a jerk. Someone who took for granted the privileges I had. But I'm not a criminal. I can't lie in court. I can't say Dad wanted to leave you nothing when I know that's not true. I'm prepared to testify on your behalf if it comes to that." A flicker of compassion and relief crossed Ebony's features. She nodded, mind spinning. If Trevor testified that Stone had manipulated the process, it would be a game changer. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I won't forget this. Trevor, and I hope, after all this, we can find some way to be. Maybe not close, but civil." Trevor swallowed hard, not quite meeting her eyes. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said. But a spark of understanding passed between them, a glimmer of unity for the first time in years. The day of the trial arrived, carrying an electric tension that crackled through the corridors of the courthouse. Reporters lined the steps, snapping photos of Ebony, Alicia, and eventually Trevor. As they entered, Richard Stone appeared soon after, flanked by his legal team. The air felt charged, like a storm about to break. In the courtroom, Ebony took a seat at the plaintiff's table beside Alicia. Across from them sat Stone, calmly flipping through files. Judge Pierce entered, robes billowing, and everyone rose. The gavel struck once, echoing through the silent hall. Alicia began with her opening statement, painting a picture of a beloved father who intended to provide for his daughter, only to have his final wishes distorted by a deceptive attorney. Richard Stone's defense labeled the accusation a desperate attempt by a disgruntled heir, claiming Ebony sought more money than her father wanted her to have. The lines were drawn. Anthony Green was called to testify again, this time in front of a full court, reaffirming that the notarization was fraudulent. He detailed the timeline and shared the incriminating emails from Stone's office requesting a notary seal while he was abroad. The defense tried to poke holes in his story, but Green held firm, presenting his passport stamps as incontrovertible proof. Next, Bellevue Trust's representative testified about James's intention to create a trust for Ebony documentation that Stone had halted. The tension thickened as the representative read from the chain of emails showing Stone's abrupt cessation of contact. Ebony stole a glance at Trevor, who sat in the audience, head bowed, possibly mustering courage for his turn on the stand. Finally, the moment came. Trevor was called to testify. Ebony's heart hammered as he walked up to the stand, took the oath, and settled into the witness chair. He glanced at Ebony, then at Stone. The tension in the room was palpable. Alicia began by gently guiding Trevor through the relationship with his father and Ebony. Trevor confirmed that his father, James, had always expressed equal concern for all his children. Then Alicia asked about his communications with Richard Stone concerning the will. Trevor hesitated, swallowing hard. I had several conversations with Mr. Stone, Trevor admitted, voice quivering. At first, he assured me Dad was making last-minute changes, but he also implied that if I challenged the validity of the will, I'd regret it. He threatened to expose personal financial mistakes I'd made, things I'd rather keep private. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Alicia pressed on. "And did Mr. Stone offer you any incentive to remain silent about these doubts?" Trevor nodded slowly, eyes darting to Richard Stone, who looked furious. "Yes," he said. "If I cooperated, he'd help me maximize my inheritance." Trevor continued. "I didn't feel right about it. When Ebony started contesting the will, I remembered conversations with Dad. He'd never have cut Ebony out so completely. I realized something was off. That's why I'm here. I can't keep quiet anymore. The defense scrambled to cross-examine Trevor, painting him as an opportunist, accusing him of lying to gain some leverage with Ebony. But Trevor stood his ground, surprisingly calm. He admitted his faults, even copping to his initial enthusiasm for the windfall. Yet he insisted that once he realized it might be based on fraud, he couldn't live with it. Ebony felt tears prick her eyes. Whatever else he was, Trevor was telling the truth now, and in doing so, he was delivering a devastating blow to Stone's defense. With Trevor's testimony rattling Stone's team, the trial reached a crescendo. Alicia then introduced copies of the letters from James to Ebony, as well as phone records showing James had contacted Bellevue Trust multiple times during the months Stone claimed James was actively revising the will. The cumulative effect painted a damning picture of Stone's deception. Stone, in a last-ditch effort, took the stand in his own defense. He insisted he was merely following James's instructions. All of this is a misunderstanding or coincidences. He stated voice, "Cool, mister. Green's notary situation is unfortunate. Trevor's financial dealings are being twisted. I stand by the validity of James Kensington's final will." But when Alicia confronted him with the contradictory emails and testimonies, Stone's confidence visibly waned. Judge Pierce intervened more than once to keep order, as Alicia hammered Stone with questions about the timing. The notary discrepancy and Bellevue Trust Stone's answers grew increasingly defensive, verging on hostile. By the end of his cross-examination, Stone's facade had cracked. The jury's faces betrayed doubt. Ebony glimpsed a flicker of panic in Stone's eyes, as if he realized the net was closing in. The closing arguments were tense. Alicia delivered a succinct, passionate summary. James Kensington loved his daughter, Ebony. He took deliberate steps to secure her future, only to have his trusted lawyer exploit and twist the estate for personal gain. Evidence shows a fraudulent notarization, halted trust proceedings, and intimidation of a key beneficiary. This is not how we honor a man's last wishes. Stone's defense tried to frame the matter as a family squabble, fueled by Ebony's resentment. They downplayed Trevor's testimony as self-serving, and insisted that all official documents carried James's signature. But they could not convincingly refute the contradictions that had piled up during the trial. When the jury left to deliberate, Ebony clenched her fists, heart pounding. Hours stretched, each minute a small eternity. She exchanged anxious looks with Alicia, while Stone sat rigidly, occasionally whispering to his lawyers. Trevor waited nearby, staring at the floor. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, cleared his throat, and announced the verdict. We find clear and convincing evidence that the will presented by Richard Stone is invalid due to fraud. We recommend that the court revoke probate of this document and revert to the last legally valid will pending further review. We also find grounds for recommending an investigation into Mr. Stone's conduct by the State Bar. The courtroom buzzed. Ebony's breath caught in her throat. She had won. Judge Pierce thanked the jury and then turned to Ebony, Ms. Kensington. The court will move to confirm the appropriate valid will. In the meantime, we award you the right to act as an interim executor while we finalize these estate matters. We also encourage you to file a separate complaint against Mr. Stone, should you wish. Ebony's eyes filled with tears. The truth had prevailed. The aftermath unfolded swiftly. Stone was charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and ethical violations. He faced disbarment, hearings, his once stellar reputation in tatters. Law enforcement discovered incriminating records in his office notes on manipulating the notary seal emails, threatening Trevor, and hidden accounts where Stone funneled money from unsuspecting clients. Ebony, meanwhile, cooperated with the authorities, providing everything she had discovered. She also offered a statement against Stone at his disbarment, proceeding describing how his betrayal devastated her family. The Bar Association found Stone guilty of misconduct, effectively ending his career. Trevor, relieved to no longer be under Stone's thumb, apologized to Ebony in a heartfelt letter, acknowledging his failures as a brother, while their relationship was far from perfect. They agreed to start anew. They spent time sorting through their father's old belongings, reminiscing slowly. Ebony felt years of tension beginning to ease. In the end, James Kensington's previous will was reinstated, granting Ebony her rightful share. A significant portion of James's assets were split between Ebony Trevor and a small trust fund James had set aside for charitable causes. True to her father's wish, Ebony received a stable inheritance, enough to honor the man who raised her and to move forward in life with dignity. But as Ebony stepped out of the courthouse on the final day, her heart thumped with a mix of sorrow and triumph. She couldn't help imagining her father, watching from somewhere proud that she never let prejudice or intimidation keep her from uncovering the truth. And so, at long last, justice was served. The truth of James Kensington's love for his black daughter shone through, despite every treacherous attempt to smother it. Richard Stone, once the family's trusted advisor, found himself reaping the bitter consequences of his deceit, disbarment, criminal charges, and public disgrace. Meanwhile, Ebony emerged not only with her rightful inheritance, but with a renewed sense of purpose and the beginnings of reconciliation with her once estranged half-brother, Trevor Friends. If this dramatic journey resonated with you, if it reminded you that truth can prevail against all odds, consider showing your support. Please like this video, share it with anyone who loves a story of justice over betrayal, and subscribe for more tales that champion resilience and morality. Your engagement keeps these powerful narratives alive, reminding us all that even in the darkest moments, integrity can illuminate the path forward. Thank you for watching, and stay vigilant for what's right.